So hi, I'm Gil Morgan, and I'm chairman of Edmonds Civic Roundtable, and thank you for being here tonight. We're really pleased to have you here. The mission of Edmonds Civic Roundtable is to empower neighbors with unbiased information. That's difficult. Everyone has a view from a point. I know many of you have heard me say something like this before. How many have never been here before? How many is new here tonight? Okay, so there's many of you who are, but many have been here, so forgive me if I repeat myself a little bit, those of you who have been here before. But everyone has a view from a point. So think about it. Some people in here voted Republican and some voted Democrat, right? We're all in the same room, so we all have a view from a point. And we all love Edmonds, and we want good things to happen in our community, and that's why we're here. We're coming together, even though we may have different views about things. So there was a philosopher many centuries ago named David Hume, and he came up with something that people call Hume's guillotine or guillotine. And what he said is the world of fact and the world of values are separate. And what he said was facts cannot tell you what you ought to do. So he was separating ought from is. And so what we try to do, and we do it imperfectly, I'll be the first to admit it, is in our communications with all of you, we do our very best to try to be factual and tell you what we think is. We're trying to tell you facts. No one here tonight who's a part of Edmonds Civic Roundtable is trying to tell you how you ought to vote. We want to make that very clear. The catch and the problem is all of us on Edmonds Civic Roundtable come from different backgrounds, biases. Some of us know how we're going to vote on the annexation, some don't. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how I would like to vote right now on annexation. So I'm truly neither for it nor against it. I've read a lot in the media where some people say we're biased, and I respect your opinion to say that. If anyone feels that way, I would hope you would pick up the phone and call me. Many of you I know. Get in touch with me. I'm easy to find. And let's talk. And at the end of the day, if you still feel that, I'm biased or ECR is biased, well, we'll just have to respect that. But what we're trying to do tonight is just talk about facts. Now, Pat is going to tell you a lot more about how the program is going to go. And the program is being conducted by citizens who, as far as Pat and I and anyone on the ECR board know, doesn't have, as they say in the South where I'm from, they don't have a dog in the hunt. So I don't think anyone on our panel was really biased one way or the other, pro-annexation or anti-annexation. They did a lot of research, and tonight, because there's going to be plenty of forums discussing this. This is not the first and only place that we can talk. So what we wanted to do as they do their research, we don't want to put them under fire where they have to stand up like you would at a firing squad and get peppered with a lot of questions. That's not because we're trying to hide anything. It's because we have volunteers. They agreed to do a term paper. They agreed to do some research and work. They're going to give you the facts as they understand it. Then Pat will tell you how the rest of the program unfolds, where we're going to try to have some dialogue. And this is only the first meeting, so please don't think this is the be-all and the end-all, or that anyone's hiding the ball. But what we are trying to do is get facts out in what we would call a civil discussion. Now, those of you who have been here before, forgive me for telling this again, but John Kennedy in his inaugural address said that civility is not a sign of weakness. but sincerity is always subject to proof. And he said that in one sentence. I didn't put two sentences together. Civility is not a sign of weakness, so we owe it to each other to be civil as we communicate about this. But we also have to prove to our fellow human beings that we're sincere in what we're saying. There was another president from the other party who famously said many times when he was talking to General Secretary Gorbachev of the Soviet Union in the strategic arms limitation negotiations, well, trust but verify. So we'd like for all of you to please be civil. We expect you to be skeptical. That's okay. Think about this. If you're unconvinced by the facts you hear, I perfectly understand, because the facts don't decide how you should vote. And we ask everyone in the room to trust but verify, because there's going to be more programs going forward, and there will be a lot more dialogue. So thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate your presence, and I'm going to turn this over to Pat, and here you go. And by the way, I just want to say one more thing. Pat and her team in programs have done an amazing job this year on putting together programs that are relevant and we believe factual, trying to inform Edmonds. So if you don't mind, I'd like for everyone to give Pat a warm round of applause. Thanks for you and your team and what you've done. So thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Why don't you wait till you see how it goes before you decide to do that? Thanks, Gil. I just wanted to say in the beginning that this week ECR lost a good friend, and I don't know how many of you knew Richard Bologna, but he came to almost every one of our programs. He was a gentleman. He believed in the Civic Roundtable, and he was a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was very proud of that. And he's the only person in the world that called me ma'am. So I'll remember him, and he will be sorely missed. We're glad you're here tonight, and our goal tonight is to provide information and resources that'll help citizens make decisions about the up-and-coming Regional Fire Authority annexation vote. This is a complicated issue. There's been the topic of conversation in city council meetings, local news for many months, and there are still questions for many of us about what brought us to this place, what a vote yes on annexation means, and what the results of a no vote might be. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide some basic information and point to some resources that might help you as you prepare to make your own decisions. Will you vote yes on annexation with the RFA, or will you vote no? We have been informed that there are many other community forums and discussions planned throughout the community the months ahead, and we encourage you to take advantage of those. We have posted some of those on our website, and we'll also post tonight's film of the speakers on our website, as well as their slide decks. So if there's things that you see and you want to capture, that will be posted. What you hear tonight is just a beginning. It's not a debate. It's not meant to convince you to vote one way or the other. In keeping with the mission of Edmonds Civic Roundtable, it's an attempt to provide nonpartisan, unbiased information to help members of the community make informed decisions. Our speakers tonight will address three basic topics. Number one, how did we get to this place? Larry Fuel will provide a brief historical perspective on emergency services in Edmonds. Number two, Nicole Gaba will address the question, what does a yes vote for annexation into the Regional Fire Authority mean for us as a city and as individuals? And what services do we get? And what are some general costs to the taxpayers? What happens if, the third piece is what happens if the measure is voted down. And what are the possible implications if we vote no on annexation? Matt Cox will offer a summary of possible options that are understood at this time and alternatives that may be considered. As you listen, it might be useful to frame your questions around those three topic areas. And there are some cards and some pens on your tables. If you hear something and you have a question, I invite you to jot it down. All three presenters are individuals who are involved in the community, have not made up their minds, or at least had not made up their minds when they started their research, on whether or not to vote yes or no. And they've worked with the ECR to research and present basic facts to aid in the understanding of this complex issue. These are citizens just like you. They've taken their task very seriously. They've done a lot of research. They've spoken to a lot of people, and they've come up with these summaries. We're calling them summaries. They're not analysis. They are summaries of the topics. As noted in our communications and with attendees, and as stated earlier, this isn't a debate. It's a time for learning. So following the presentations, we'll invite you, as we often do at our monthly gatherings, to spend a few minutes at your tables talking with your neighbors and friends about what you heard and coming up with your questions. And tonight, at the conclusion of our program, there'll be a time to continue your conversations and ask your individual questions of those who have agreed to be here tonight to answer those questions informally. We'll introduce those folks when we get to the end of our program and are very grateful for their presence here tonight. They include individuals who we know have concerns about a yes vote and are willing to share those reasons and concerns with you, as well as folks from the City Council and the RFA. And we have also agreed to be here. They've also agreed to be here and talk with you informally. Now, our first presenter is Larry Fuel, and he will speak to you about a brief historical perspective on our emergency and fire services. Larry has lived in Edmonds since 2003. He taught part-time and was a director of Global Affairs Center at the Shoreline Community College. He worked for the Foreign Agriculture Service, an international agency of U.S. Department of Agriculture, and he served as an agricultural affairs officer at U.S. embassies in Guatemala, China, and Peru. Since moving to Edmonds, he's become involved as a volunteer with Edmonds Historical Museum, the Edmonds Food Bank, the Edmonds Waterfront Center, and the Edmonds Civic Roundtable. Larry enjoys interacting with other people and learning about their lives in Edmonds and elsewhere. So let's welcome Larry.
This summary that I'm going to give you in 10 minutes or so of how we got here is various publications, particularly My Edmonds News and other news and official sources, and from talking with individuals who know a lot more about the past, present, and the future of fire protection and emergency services in this community. I received a lot of suggestions from the organizers of this event, from my fellow presenters, and from scores of others like the individuals that I just mentioned. I thank them very much for their assistance, and I apologize if I make mistakes despite their best efforts. Any errors of omission or commission are mine entirely. And as Pat said, copies of this presentation will be available on the ECR website. So if I'm talking too fast, or you want to grab some of this information, it will be there to look at. So the first thing is, and this is very brief, I was asked to focus primarily on 2010 and forward, but you can't talk about fire service in Edmonds without mentioning that we started a fire department here in 1904, and at that time there was, according to the research I've done, I think 15 individuals, including a fire chief. They were all volunteers. The equipment consisted of things like this hose cart. I understand there was one fire hose, there was a nozzle, and there was a ladder. And there was some sort of big hole for helping to dry the ladder when after we fought a fire. The area that they were protecting was probably less than a square mile, best I can tell. Primarily 2nd Avenue and then on down toward the water, because there were a lot of shingle mills that kept catching fire and burning down. And the population at that time, or close to that time, was about 1,500 people. So that was the past. By the time, fast forward to 2009, 100 years or so, when Edmonds stopped having its own fire department and basically contracted for services, there was, I think, approximately 51 personnel, including some administrative staff. There were 3 fire stations. There were, it covered an area of 39,000 miles in 2010, or excuse me, a population of 39,000. I think it's over 40 today. And the area was about 18.5 square miles, so quite a bit larger area. That was responsibility of the fire department and the emergency services. Let's see, due to rising costs of providing fire and emergency services, in November of 2009, the City Council voted to disband the Edmonds Fire Department and to enter into a 20-year contract with what at that time was called Fire District Number 1. Later on, Fire District Number 1 was reorganized into the South Snohomish County Fire and Rescue Regional Authority, or RFA. I keep seeing it referred to as RFA and sometimes as the Southern County Fire. I think they're the same, but I'm not positive. So I use those terms interchangeably. Let's see, the key terms of the agreement signed in 1999, it took effect on January 1st of 2010, was there was a 20-year duration of the contract. Either party could withdraw after 5 years if they haven't been enforced, but they had to give a 2-year notice, so that they wanted to get out of the agreement. There was a transfer of personnel from the Edmonds Fire Department to the at that time I've already forgot the name of it, the Fire District Number 1. It keeps changing its name. There was some sale of firefighting equipment. There was no transfer of the fire stations. That is, they remained the property of Edmonds. And the cost of the contract was approximately $6.2 million the first year, with provisions in the contract on how the cost would be adjusted year to year. I'm missing something. Here we go. So I looked at the developments from 2010 to 2023, and again, there was a lot of stuff going on, but the gist of it that I could tell was the contract took effect. The city received a bill for about $1.6 million in 2014 for some contract for some labor costs. So there was some adjustment there. There had been 3 amendments to the original agreement in 2012, 2015, 2017. I was unable to find details on what those amendments were about, but I assume they had to do with related to costs. In 2017 is when the Fire District Number 1 was reorganized into what we know today as the RFA. In September of 2023, the city notified RFA that it intended to investigate the advantages and disadvantages of annexation. This concept of annexation versus a contract is a really important one tonight, and I think others will be talking about it, but basically annexation means the citizens of Edmonds get the fire services and they're taxed directly by what is now the RFA, as opposed to the city, and then the city pays the bill. And what we signed in 2009 was a contract. the city would pay a certain amount of money for the fire services to be provided to its residents or its citizens. But yeah, let's see. So the city notified that it was going to study annexation, and it was going to be a report was going to be prepared by an outfit called Fitch, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Associates. The study was to provide background information to help guide the discussions of alternative fire and emergency service options. I'll be saying more about the results of that study in just a couple of minutes. In December of that same year, the city received notification from RFA that it was going to be that RFA was going to be removed, was going to withdraw from the contract of 2000 that was signed in 2009. They gave 2 years notice, so it would be effective the end of 2025, so a little over 2 years from the date of the letter. At that time, and the city was told in there were a couple of different letters, and the city was told that basically it could either annex into RFA. Now, we the citizens would be part of RFA, so we would be taxed directly by RFA, or the city could renegotiate its contract for services with RFA. But the letters ended with the assurances that this Edmonds citizens are not going to be abandoned at the end of 2025. That's something that's going to be worked out. Let's see. So in April of 2024, the city got its report from the Fish report, and it talked about different options. Annexation, Edmonds goes back to having its own fire department, or contracts with another fire service. What the report says, it's a long report and it's available, it's going to be available, it's on the website already. So it's there if you'd like to read it. It's really exciting reading. If you can't sleep at night, that report. Basically, annexation into RFA was considered to be the most economical, about $18 million, according to the people that did the report. The next most economical option was recreating or reestablishing its own fire department here in Edmonds. But the cost calculations, it's always coming down to the cost, and it's very difficult. The cost calculations assume that Edmonds would be buying all new equipment. If some or all of the equipment given to the RFA in 2010 was returned to the city and still usable, the cost would be less than the $19 million price tag that they put on it. So it'd be less. It would suddenly become the most economical alternative. The least economical option is contracting with another municipal fire department. I think for a brief period of time they looked at contracting with Shoreline, and then the conclusion there was that one wasn't going to work. So moving forward, it's on the same slide. The council approved a resolution in June of that year expressing the city's intent to begin negotiations. I already said that. And then in September, the council signaled its intention to retain in 2026 any money that it be collecting for fire and emergency services. And I think that's even if we decide to let me go forward. I can go back over any of this stuff because Pat says we have unlimited time to do this. Let's see. Oh, there was in December of that year of 2024, the council agreed to ask voters to have this vote in April of 2025. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight. At the same meeting, as the council made that decision, there was also someone there from the RFA that said, look, the RFA Board of Commissioners has agreed that if Edmonds voters approve RFA annexation, fire stations 16 and 20 go to RFA. It is true. But if the citizens of Edmonds choose later to exit the RFA, ownership of the stations would revert to Edmonds, and the city can purchase the rolling stock, such as the fire engines, and 8 cars from the RFA at fair market value. Obviously, if they make big improvements to the stations, that has to be there has to be some compensation there. Let's see, so this is my last slide. I tried to summarize what I understand to be the cost of contracting services from 2010 through up till 2025. The last number is just an estimate, but it was confirmed just this weekend in a retreat by the council. Tiny print, isn't it? Well, Matt's going to cover some of this too. Did you know that, Matt? I had something else to say, but I seem to have lost my... Thank you. You took it away, didn't you? Oh. That's not me. Doesn't matter. No, that's it. But I have one more slide. But I had something to say about, something profound to say about all of this information. I don't know where it is now. I'll find it as soon as I sit down. But in any event, like I said, this information was taken from, I tried to identify where it came from. There was a committee report, a levy committee report that made a presentation to the mayor and the city council that had some of the numbers from the early years for fire and police services. And then I looked at the South County Fire budget documents for the years from 2018 until 2024, and that's where I got those numbers. Those numbers don't always make sense to me because they're higher one year than the next, but I'm told they're very close. And then 2025 is estimated to be $12 million, and others will talk about what happens in the future. And since I'm supposed to be talking about the past, I'm not going to talk about the future. So what I'm going to do now is introduce the next speaker, Nicole Gaba. She's lived in Edmonds. She claims to live close to 2 fire stations. She's been in real estate for 10 years. She's currently an agent with Windermere and Corey Whitaker Homes. She's also an active real estate investor with experience in self-managing residential properties. She also volunteers and plays with the Edmonds Pétanque Club. So with that, without further ado, I'll pass it.
All right. Thank you so much, Larry. Hello, neighbors. Good evening. To those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Nicole Gappa, and I'm here to talk to you about the annexation into the RFA. But before I begin, let me just pull that up. Before I begin, I want to apologize because I have a lot of slides, and they're pretty text heavy. However, that is done with intentionality to ensure we can convey to you as much accurate information that we could dig up at this time to prepare you for the vote coming up in April. I know Larry has shared a lot of information. Thank you so much, Larry. And I'm about to sprinkle in a little bit more. So I appreciate your patience and your continued attention as we dive deeper into this topic of annexation. Let's begin. The 2 main questions that we are hoping to answer tonight for this topic are, number 1, what services do we actually get? And number 2, what does a yes vote mean to us as a city and as individuals? As an overview, I'll be talking a little bit about status quo, some additional RFA services, the financial impact to the city and to taxpayers. So one of the main things that I've discovered in the process of studying for this term paper is that status quo will remain unchanged until the end of 2025. So what does that mean in practice? By voting for annexation or not, our community will continue to receive the same level of service, the same level of fire and EMS services that we do now, at least through the end of 2025 when our current contract ends. But what exactly is status quo? Let's dig a little bit deeper. In 2023, Edmonds recorded 6,147 emergency responses, marking a significant 12% increase between 2019 and 2023. And just last year, Edmonds accounted for 16% of the total responses recorded by the Regional Fire Authority. And all of those calls originated from Snohomish County 911. Services were dispatched through one of our 3 fire stations. Yes, I lived near 2 of them. And of those, they house 3 fire engines, 3 to 5 Medicaid units, and a rescue boat nearby at the Port of Edmonds. And callers get the closest emergency vehicle regardless of jurisdiction. This will not change. We also have trained firefighters, EMTs, paramedic staff, and all of them respond to calls and carry out emergency protocols. The RFA is responsible for training firefighter, paramedic, and firefighter EMT response teams, plus coordination with hospitals and transporting. As emergency situations become more complex and with increased risk, the RFA utilizes additional resources like hazmat or technical rescue teams, and this also will not change. Here are some more additional fire services or RFA services we will receive and continue to receive through contract or annexation. First, mutual aid with other districts. The RFA serves Linwood, Ryder, Edmonds, Mount Lake Terrace, and all of its surrounding unincorporated areas. Response times are super critical in saving lives and property in emergency situations. By joining into the RFA, we tap into this larger network that gives us access to longer-term processes and improvements that are already established. Mutual aid also goes beyond the RFA and to all the neighboring jurisdictions. We also benefit from economies of scale. Now, what does this mean in practice? We are able to leverage more buying power when it comes to purchasing or maintaining equipment like fire trucks, engines, tools, and many more. We also have access to more firefighters and emergency responders. Annexation will allow us the services of firefighters and emergency responders who are highly trained and well compensated. We also get access to trained volunteers who are ready to be deployed to shut down areas, maintain closed streets, reroute people away from danger zones, and attend to other emergencies. We also have access to a disaster response service and hazmat response services. Specifically, the RFA has something called a disaster response program, which has plans to respond to catastrophic emergencies. And they also have plans for an emergency operations center. They also offer services for frequent callers and community outreach. For instance, they have something called the Community Paramedic Program. They also have a grant program in partnership with Verdant Health, offering support to residents who need frequent assistance, like help with food issues, or transportation for care, or home care referrals, and mental and behavioral health issues. We also have access to online and in-person programs like Aging in Place, disaster preparedness, home fire safety, and many more. For residents within the service area, the RFA also have outreach staff to assist with smoke and carbon monoxide alarms and to evaluate home fall hazards. We also have access to reserves. RFA, being a larger entity, serving several cities, has access to fiscal reserves. And these reserves allow us to have the resources to deploy emergency personnel and equipment in the event of a significant catastrophic emergency. And these reserves allow the RFA to maintain the stations and the equipment that need significant upgrades. We also have growth planning and foresight through the RFA. Currently, the RFA actually dedicates resources to track and respond to population growth trends, which informs how to best deploy funds and to maintain or prepare for new fire stations or hubs where more growth and residency is anticipated. What is one additional benefit that we are going to get with the yes vote? What we get is RFA representation. A yes vote to annexation allows Edmonds residents to run the south, County Board of Fire Commissioners and vote on the fire EMS ballot measures. This allows residents accountability and direction for the future of services. And Edmonds would then become a full partner in the Regional Fire Authority along with the other municipalities. So in a nutshell, we get a lot, and we're going to maintain all of that. We're going to maintain the current level of service if we vote yes to annexation, plus we get the added RFA representation. So now, what does this all mean to the city and to taxpayers? Let's first talk about the impact of the city. You might know that Edmonds is experiencing a fiscal crisis with a roughly $29 million budget shortfall. So if the yes vote does pass, money that has been previously dedicated to fire EMS coverage will be allocated to other critical city services. And the yes vote would help the city with current budget shortfall issues. But, there is a but, the cost to taxpayers will increase. What is the impact to the city government? All responsibilities for fire and EMS services transferred directly to the RFA, like Larry had alluded to earlier, which will directly tax residents and businesses for these services. The city government will then be relieved of these duties. The city will also no longer have obligations to fund fire or EMS contract payments, no obligation to maintain or improve any of the 3 fire stations, or no longer has to fund firefighters, retiree health obligations, etc. The current Edmonds city budget is in a fiscal crisis, and the existing costs for fire or EMS services of approximately $12 million is exacerbating the problem. So, if Edmonds were to continue to contract with the RFA for fire and EMS services, these costs will escalate to approximately $19 million. So a yes vote for RFA annexation relieves the city of the significant expense. So what is the impact? Yes. Okay. Okay, no problem. So what is the impact to taxpayers? This is probably why most of you are here. First, we will continue to ensure that the fire and EMS coverage is equivalent to what residents and businesses now receive. Money previously dedicated to fire EMS coverage can be allocated to other city services, and the taxes for residents and businesses will increase. Here is a hypothetical example that we can go through. And this is based on what the City of Edmonds has determined will be the calculation for a lot of their publications. So let's go with an average assessed value of a home in Edmonds. Median home price, roughly $895. The current tax for a home like this, total city taxes, general property taxes, and the EMS levy is about $895. If we were to proceed with annexation, then the total city taxes, general property taxes, RFA levy, and the RFA EMS levy jumps to $1683.92 plus benefit charge. And we're assuming this is about a 2,500 square foot home. So now that jumps from $895 to $1,762.62. And that increase is about $866. So roughly double. And I know this is a lot to digest. So if you would like to learn more, 3 resources first. You can go to City of Edmonds website, click on this specific link so you can go directly to the page. You can go to the South Snohomish County Fire website, and you can go to our website, download the slide deck, watch the video. And there are a couple more events that you can attend to learn more.
Can you go back one so we can picture that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, you can download it as well. The whole slide deck will be available for everyone to read for some light reading in the next couple of evenings. That'll be fun. Okay, couple more events. Maybe we'll see you on Feb 23rd, Feb 25th, March 4th at the Rotary, March 18th, Daybreaker Rotary, and just stay tuned. Between now and April, the City of Edmonds will be hosting town halls where we can learn more and discuss more and have more dialogue about this topic. And this is a lot. There's a little bit more. Thank you so much for your attention. And now I will introduce Matt Cox. So Matt, this gentleman over here, is a lifelong resident of the Pacific Northwest, growing up and building a family in Seattle, Bellingham, Everett, and now in Edmonds. By profession, he is a relationship manager for a large financial institution and devotes much of his free time volunteering in the Edmonds community. When he is not working or volunteering, he is spending time with family or going for a run on the streets of Edmonds, lamenting the missing stretches of sidewalks. Matt has not yet formulated a position on an annexation vote, and neither have I. Here you go, Matt Cox.
Question before you start. Could you repeat again what you said about availability of this PowerPoint presentation?
Oh.
We can download it from what website?
That's on the Civic Roundtable website, the Edmonds Civic Roundtable website.
All the PowerPoint that we've seen tonight?
Yeah, the entire presentation.
Thank
Yes.
Hey, Matt?
Yes.
One of the people here in the audience is presenting at the Northwest Civic Circle, and she was saying that the date's February 22 instead of 23. So just everyone, if you're paying attention to the dates, you might want to double check that one.
Thank
Make a note of that. And
Yeah, I'll make sure that's changed on the slide when it gets posted. Sorry.
all right. I'll reiterate, thank you. Great job, Nicole. So we're running a little longer than intended. So I'm going to go through my portion of the presentation as quickly as possible without rushing. But I do want to just take a moment first to thank the Civic Roundtable for putting this on and letting me participate. Waterfront Center for hosting, and all of you too for attending tonight, being flexible with the scheduling. I know there was a wrinkle there, so thank you for staying committed to this. Before I get into my slides, I do want to provide a little context though, and refer you back to Gil and Pat's comments at the beginning. And that is, when Pat asked me to do this, she very much stressed to me that this is, a factual presentation, and it's not a pro and con. It's just, laying out the facts as we have them today. And I thought, great, piece of cake. That'll be easy. I was kind of foolish though, because laying out facts for something that hasn't happened yet, there is a certain challenge to that. There is a certain hypothetical nature to what I'm going to be talking about, because A, it hasn't happened yet, and the outcome is a little bit uncertain if it's a no vote. So just want to lay that out right now. So for me, as I started researching this, it helped me to think about it. As I was researching it, things started fitting into place, and I realized that it's helpful for me to think about things in terms of what do we know and what do we not know. That gave me a framework to fit the facts into, and what could be coming, what should be coming, and allowed for some of what I feel to be as close to objective analysis as I can possibly come up with. So that is the framework for my presentation as well, and I hope it's useful for you too. So let's start with what we know. What we do know has already been mentioned earlier. Fire service and EMS will continue under the currently existing arrangement through the end of 2025. That is under the current contract, and none of those terms or services change. The city and the RFA have reached a mutual agreement to provide uninterrupted fire and EMS services through calendar year 2026 under contracted services. We have that agreement negotiated. In the case of a no vote, there are actually, what we do know is that there aren't any set plans in place for services after 2026. There are options for us to consider as a community, but there are no set active plans for services past 2026. Nicole gave us a great rundown on the 2025 piece already, so I'm not going to rehash that. I'm going to dig in a little bit more to that 2026 contract, and then on the next slide, and then a little later in the presentation, I will go over some of the options. So let's talk a little bit about contracting for services in 2026. The contract, as it stands right now, is a one-year contract. Terms are for 2026 calendar year only. Now, it's important to note that there is a clause in that contract that states that it may be renewed for additional one-year terms after 2026, but that is subject to negotiations by mutual agreement of the parties. Service levels would be the same as we would receive under annexation. So all the firefighting, EMS, hazmat, rescue services, personnel training, HR, legal services, all of that is exactly the same level of service as if annexation passes. And those service levels are commensurate with what we're receiving today. What else do we know? We know that cost is going up. And Nicole went over that in detail. But I just want to make the point that if we vote yes to annexation, the cost to us as taxpayers goes up. If we vote no, the cost goes up. The contract ends at the end of I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. A no vote does not mean that we would continue to receive services beyond 2025 under the contract that we're currently operating under. And I hope that makes sense. The contract ends at the end of 2025, whether we vote no, whether we vote yes. Regardless of how we vote, we will pay more. The latest numbers being discussed are the prices of services going from $12.1 million in 2025 to $21 million in 2026. Though we do have to wait for the property assessment to take place at the county level later on in 2025 for tax year 2026 in order to get specific final numbers. Yes. So there's another piece that I do want to bring up and that bears some discussion. There may be questions about this. I'm going to try to explain it as best I can, and hopefully I do it right. And if I'm wrong, then people can correct me, and you can ask your questions after this portion of the event. But I want to talk about stable funding sources. That's a term that's popped up recently, and I'm going to do, like I said, I'll do my best to explain it. So if annexation gets voted down, there will not be in the City of Edmonds a dedicated revenue stream for fire services. We will continue to have the EMS levy as a revenue stream. Under those circumstances, firefighting services and EMS will be paid as a line item out of the general fund from revenue sources for the general fund. And as Nicole mentioned, as things stand right now, under the conditions laid out for the city in the current biennium, there is not a surplus amount available to pay for these services. So I'll repeat that. If we vote no, we will need to pay for fire and emergency medical services out of the general fund. We do not have sufficient revenue coming into the general fund to cover that cost and operate according to the current budget as it stands today. The lack of a dedicated revenue stream for firefighting services, along with a general fund budget imbalance, is why this outcome is considered to lack a stable funding source. So I hope that's right. But whether it's right or wrong, it's leading me to my next section, which is what we don't know. And it leads us straight into that first question. How will taxpayer of Edmonds pay for fire service and EMS under the new contract for 2026? Another big question is, if it gets voted down, what happens after 2026? So we'll take the first question. How do we pay for it? Sort of looking at it systematically, the city would continue to collect the EMS tax levy, general fund taxes. We would no longer receive transport fees that we have been receiving. transport fees are bills that are received for emergency medical transportation, like when you have to take an ambulance ride to the hospital. In extreme cases would be for helicopter, that sort of thing. So putting those revenue streams together, that leaves us with a shortfall. The latest estimates for that shortfall would be about $8.9 million. And that shortfall, we know, has to be filled. We have just 3 options, as far as I can tell, to fill that shortfall. We can increase taxes for the general fund. We can cut other services provided by the city, or we can find alternate revenue streams, or realistically, find, some combination of those things. And just one final point on that, I just want to make sure we're keeping in mind that is not a small hole to fill. The 8.9 million amounts to about 17% of the total general fund expenditures appropriated for 2026. So it's a good chunk of change that will have to be found. Again, I'm not here to draw conclusions about this, just to prevent the facts on that. So last piece of this is to look at what the options are for services after 2026 if the no vote wins. There are some other ideas, hence the last bullet point down there, floating around out there in the community, some interesting, creative ideas that involve taking a different look at how we provide these services. But at this time, the main options outside of annexation that have been looked at are contracting with the RFA on an annual basis beyond 2026, creating a partnership with another party or parties, and creating our own fire and EMS department. First option is fairly straightforward. As I mentioned earlier, the current agreement is for 1 year, 2026 only, but it does contain a clause in there that allows for the possibility of renewal. I did capture the exact language just for your benefit. The contract states, quote, "The ILA may be renewed beyond the expiration date for additional 1-year terms only by mutual agreement of the parties." And that's the extent of it. But there are also other options for us to consider. One of the major options is looking at other partnerships. In terms of creating a partnership with someone else, we could contract with another city, as Woodway has done with Shoreline, or we could pursue an option of forming another RFA with other municipalities that are not currently part of any RFA. The only partnership that I could find that had hard facts associated with it was through the Fitch report that Larry mentioned. The Fitch consultants investigated a partnership between the Edmonds and the city of Shoreline. I believe that was a contractual relationship again. After consulting with Shoreline, they concluded that the cost to Edmonds for that option would be higher than the other options. And I do have to mention that, and I find it interesting, that Shoreline, Kenmore, and Lake Forest Park have put to their voters the option to create their own RFA. They're having a special election for that taking place this month. I actually think that the election day is tomorrow. So I'm going to divert from facts for just a second here and do a little hypothesizing or speculating. But I feel it's safe to say that keeping a close eye on the outcome of that process and how it plays out would be of great value to us here in our community. Just again, seeing how it plays out and if there are any lessons that we might be able to learn from what happens there. So there are other municipalities out there that potentially could form a partnership of some kind with our city. But again, we don't have any hard data. We don't have any facts to back that up. So I'm not going to really dig into it too much, but that is a potential option that we could explore following a no vote. The other major option out there is for Edmonds to form its own fire department and EMS. Fitch did also look at this option. They determined that the operational cost for comparable services would be slightly less than annexation, but with the capital requirements and debt servicing that would come along with it, the cost would be slightly higher, but very close. Now, in the shorter term, this option would result in significantly higher expenses. Essentially, we would have to pay for uninterrupted services, contracting for uninterrupted services while we're investing to build that fire department. On the flip side, it's very much true that forming our own department would allow for the greatest level of local control. I mean, I don't think it's speculative or opinionated to say that making the decision of what price we want to pay for what level of service under this scenario would be strictly within the Edmonds community, and that gives us the most local control. Again, there were a few other options that I've seen, heard, mentioned. The one alternative option that I could find data on was, again, in the Fitch report. They looked at splitting out EMS from fire services, which I do understand a perspective on looking into that. Like 85%, approximately 85% of service calls are EMS related, so if you could split those out, then might be some benefits there. Fitch concluded that that was not a viable option for a couple different reasons, but I do think it's a legitimate fact to say that we as a community could look at that more closely and could dig deeper into that. The other options on there for alternative models for providing services, alternative delivery systems, alternative training models, that sort of thing, those tend to be based on delivery models from other communities, and a lot more study would have to take place in order to determine if that's feasible or optimal for us here in Edmonds. So that's about it for me. Well, kind of short and sweet summary of what happens if the majority of voters say no to annexation is, at least through the end of 2026, Edmonds will continue to receive the same level of service that we have been receiving. The cost of that service goes up significantly, and a lot of work will need to go into figuring out how to pay for it and to maintain a balanced budget. And after 2026, there's uncertainty. Whether that uncertainty is a positive, whether you view that as an opportunity for us to take the time to dig into alternative models and figure out what is best for the community over the long haul, or if you view that as more of a threat, more of a risk, by putting such a fundamentally important piece of city services kind of back on the drawing board, is that an acceptable level of risk for you? That's for all of us to decide individually as voters. And that's kind of the purpose of this presentation, was to help arm you to do that. So that's it. So next, well, thank you all for listening to all of us talking up here. We're going to get away from talking at you now and get to the more interactive part. So as we often do at ECR events, we were going to invite you to take some time at your tables to discuss what you heard and formulate any questions that you still have. Perhaps with the discussion with your table mates, some of your questions might get answered. But if they don't, please write them down. And if you can, kind of categorize the question into one of these three categories here. That will help us for the next phase of things, so we can kind of get you pointed in the right direction to get the questions answered. So, 10 minutes? 5 to 10 minutes if you talk amongst yourselves, and we'll come back.